I was standing barefoot on the cold marble floor of our kitchen at 4 in the morning, holding a glass of water I had no intention of drinking, when my phone lit up with a message that was not meant for me. For a second I thought it was exhaustion, pregnancy fog, some cruel trick of a mind that had not slept properly in weeks, but then I read it again, and my body reacted before my thoughts could catch up. My hands shaking, my stomach tightening in a way that had nothing to do with the baby growing inside me. It was his name at the top of the screen, my husband's name, and beneath it a line that ended with a heart emoji I had not seen him use in years. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not drop the phone. I just stood there in the dark kitchen of our house in Palo Alto, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the wall clock, and understood with terrifying clarity that my life had already split into before and after. At that moment I was 8 months pregnant with our second child. My back aching, my ankles swollen by evening, my days structured around our 3-year-old son's routine, and the illusion that we were a family that had survived success without losing itself. My husband, Marcus, was already a millionaire by 35. Tech money, early investments, the kind of success people admire without understanding the cost, or maybe without caring. To the outside world, we were a perfect couple. The woman who stood quietly beside him at conferences, the children, the house, the calm elegance that suggested stability and class. The nanny Lila was supposed to be a detail in that picture, a practical necessity, a young woman in her early 20s who helped with our son while I worked part-time from home and tried to manage a pregnancy that had been harder than the first. She was polite, attentive, always careful not to take up too much space, or so I thought. I did not confront Marcus that night, or the next morning, or even the next week. I carried the knowledge inside me like a second pregnancy, heavier and more dangerous, and watched everything with new eyes. I noticed how he checked his phone more often, how he started coming home later with explanations that sounded reasonable if you wanted to believe them. Investor dinners, emergency meetings, spontaneous trips. I noticed how Lila suddenly became quieter around me, avoiding my gaze, moving through the house as if she were afraid of leaving fingerprints. What shocked me most was not the affair itself, as painful as that was, but how little effort Marcus put into hiding his sense of entitlement. There was no guilt in his behavior, only impatience, as if my body, my pregnancy, our family life were inconveniences he had not anticipated when he chose pleasure over responsibility. The first time I heard him talking to her on the phone while standing in the backyard, I was sitting inside with my hand on my stomach, feeling the baby kick, and I realized something fundamental had changed. I was no longer his partner in this life. I was an obstacle. The confrontation came 2 weeks later, not because I planned it, but because he grew careless. He left his laptop open on the dining table, and there it was, a calendar shared with Lila, hotel reservations, notes that spoke of a parallel life he had built while I was choosing paint colors for the nursery. I waited until our son was asleep, until the house was quiet, and then I asked him one simple question. How long? He did not deny it, did not even pretend to misunderstand. He just exhaled as if relieved the performance was over, and told me it had been a few months, that he never meant to hurt me, that things had just happened. Things had just happened while I was carrying his child. I remember sitting on the edge of the couch, my hands folded over my belly, feeling strangely detached from my own body, as if I were watching a scene from someone else's life. He talked about feeling lonely, misunderstood, pressured, words that floated in the air without touching anything real. When I asked him about Lila, about how he could look at our son and then go upstairs with the woman we trusted with his care, he became defensive, annoyed, as if I were being dramatic. He said she made him feel seen, that she did not judge him, that she understood the demands of his world. That was when I realized he'd already rewritten the story in his head, where he was the victim of a cold, distant wife and a demanding family, and she was the refuge. The separation happened quickly after that. He moved out within a month, into a sleek apartment in San Francisco, and made no attempt to hide that Lila was with him. By the time I gave birth to our daughter, they were already presenting themselves as a couple, careful not to post anything publicly, but not exactly discreet either. Marcus assumed things would unfold as they always had on his terms. He had money, lawyers, influence, and he believed that meant control. He talked about selling the house, about restructuring assets, about what would be fair, a word he used often without understanding its meaning. The house, the one we were sitting in when I first felt my daughter move inside me, had been bought 5 years earlier, when his first big exit had turned our cautious plans into confident decisions. At the time, his accountant suggested putting it in my name, something about tax efficiency, asset distribution, protection. Marcus had waved it off as irrelevant, a technicality, because the idea that I would ever stand opposite him had not crossed his mind. When he realized that technicality meant he could not force a sale, could not use the house as leverage, his tone changed. The calm confidence gave way to irritation, then to thinly veiled threats. He suggested I was being ungrateful, that without him I would not have this life, that he could make things very difficult if I chose to fight. I did not fight. Not openly. I nodded. I listened. I let him believe I was overwhelmed, confused, dependent. I answered his messages politely, agreed to discussions, postponed decisions. Silence became my shield. What Marcus did not understand was that while he was focused on what he could take, I was paying attention to what he could lose. Over the next year, as I settled into life as a single mother of 2, I watched him from a distance. I watched how he spoke about responsibility in public panels, while missing scheduled visits with his children. I watched how his colleagues praised his discipline and vision, unaware of the chaos he left behind, closed doors. I began documenting everything, not obsessively, not emotionally, but methodically. Missed child support payments, canceled visits, careless messages, contradictions between his public statements and private actions. I did not share this with anyone, not my friends, not my family, because this was not about validation. It was about timing. Lila, now his girlfriend, struggled with the reality of the role she had stepped into. She was no longer the admired secret, but the visible partner of a man with obligations he preferred to ignore. She reached out to me once, a message filled with nervous apologies and justifications, claiming she had not known the full situation, that she was young and confused. I did not respond. The moment that shifted everything came during a charity event Marcus hosted, one of those carefully curated evenings designed to reinforce his image as a thoughtful leader and family man. I attended not as his partner, but as the mother of his children, invited for appearances, a role I accepted with quiet interest. Standing in that hotel ballroom in San Jose, listening to him speak about mentorship and ethics, I felt a calm I had not known in years. This was not anger. It was clarity. When someone asked him publicly about work-life balance, about how he managed success in fatherhood, he smiled and spoke about priorities, about showing up, about values he did not practice. I watched the audience nod, inspired. That was when I knew it was time. I did not interrupt him, did not expose him in that room, because humiliation is easy and fleeting. Control is something else entirely. Over the next few months, I quietly shared my documentation with the right people. Not tabloids, not social media, but boards, legal advisors, partners who cared deeply about optics and liability. I did it carefully, never accusing, simply providing facts when asked, letting conclusions form on their own. Marcus noticed the change before he understood it. Meetings became tense, questions sharper, trust thinner. Invitations slowed. He called me more often, his voice tight with suspicion, asking what I was doing, who I was talking to. I told him nothing. By the time he realized his reputation was no longer untouchable, that his narrative had cracks, it was too late. He had lost contracts, not publicly, but quietly, the way powerful people fall when no one wants to be associated with risk. The house remained mine, a constant reminder that control cannot always be bought back. When he finally confronted me, not with anger but with fear, asking how this had happened, I looked at him and felt nothing. I told him the truth, that I had simply stopped protecting him from the consequences of his own choices. I did not raise my voice, did not accuse. I just stated facts, the same way I had for months. That was when he understood that money could not fix everything, that charm could not rewrite reality, and that the woman he underestimated had been watching all along. When Marcus left that night, he did not slam the door or threaten me. He just stood in the hallway for a moment, looking smaller than I had ever seen him, and then walked out without saying goodbye to the children who were already asleep. After that conversation, something shifted in him. Not remorse, not growth, but panic. The illusion that he was untouchable had cracked, and once that happens, it never fully seals again. He started sending longer messages, carefully worded, trying to rebuild some form of alliance, as if we were still negotiating equals. He suggested mediation, joint statements, private agreements that would keep everything quiet. I kept my responses short and neutral, not cold, not warm, just factual. Silence is unsettling to people who are used to control, because it gives them nothing to push against. Lila left him 3 months later. I did not hear it from him. I heard it through a mutual acquaintance who spoke in a lowered voice, as if describing a scandal that needed to be handled gently. She had underestimated what it meant to be with a man whose public image mattered more to him than any private relationship. She had imagined a life of ease and admiration, but instead found herself managing his resentment, his paranoia, his constant need for reassurance. When she moved out, Marcus tried to frame it as a mutual decision, a phase that had run its course, but the timing was too precise. The pressure he felt professionally had begun to leak into his personal life, and she became another variable he could not fully control. He started showing up for the children more consistently after that, not out of sudden devotion, but because absence had become another mark against him. Even then, his involvement felt performative, as if he were following a checklist someone else had written. I watched all of this from the steady rhythm of my days: school drop-offs, pediatric appointments, quiet evenings in the house he once believed he could take from me. The walls no longer felt like a stage set for someone else's success. They felt solid, earned, grounded in something real. One afternoon, almost 2 years after that night in the kitchen, Marcus asked if we could talk again, just the two of us. He suggested a cafe near his office, neutral territory. I agreed, not because I owed him anything, but because curiosity had replaced fear. He arrived early and stood when he saw me, a habit from another life. His suit was expensive as always, but it hung differently on him now, as if the confidence that once filled it had thinned. He talked about restructuring his company, about stepping back, about learning lessons he wished he had learned sooner. At some point he stopped talking and looked at me directly, not as an opponent, not as an asset, but as a person he no longer understood. He asked me how I had stayed so calm through everything, how I had not tried to destroy him when I had the chance. I told him the truth again, that I did not want to destroy him. I wanted him to stop believing that other people existed to absorb the damage of his choices. He nodded slowly, as if this explanation required effort to process. There was no apology that day, not a real one, just an acknowledgement that things had not gone the way he expected. That was enough. We left the cafe separately, and I knew that would be the last conversation that mattered. Today, my life is quieter, smaller in some ways, but infinitely more honest. The children are older now, aware enough to ask questions I answer carefully, without bitterness, without rewriting history to spare myself. They know their father loves them in the way he knows how, and they know I am here, consistently, without conditions. Sometimes people still ask about Marcus, about how it felt to lose a wealthy husband, about whether I regret not fighting harder in the beginning. I tell them nothing dramatic, nothing satisfying, because the truth is not a spectacle. The truth is that I learned something fundamental in that silence, that watching is not weakness, that restraint can be power, and that control built on money and fear dissolves the moment someone stops playing along. I did not win by taking anything from him. I won by stepping out of the role he assigned me, and letting him face a world where consequences no longer had somewhere else to land.